Welcome. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this broadcast. Today, we're going to talk about aging spiritually. And as a great number of the population is aging, because the great baby boom generation is now entering into its senior years, that involves a huge sector of the population. The oldest baby boomer was born in 1946. So in 2023 is 77. The youngest baby boomer is born in 1964. So we're talking about 59. So all baby boomers are that age, and there are a lot of them. One of them may well be you. I myself am of full retirement age, so I'm part of the picture, and I hope I have some insights to share about it. Well, one thing that is frequently said about our society is that we neglect the wisdom of the elders. People point to traditional societies and say, well, they honor their elders. They look to them for advice and wisdom and guidance. Whereas in our culture, seniors, or as I like to call them, old people, are routinely shunted aside and ignored because we live in such a youth-oriented culture. Now, you probably expected me to say this when you tuned in, and so I did. That's all taken care of. Yes, that's basically true. But that's only a rather superficial part of the picture. Because assuming you are an elder, you have to ask yourself, what wisdom do you have to share, and are you sharing? Because there are an enormous number of old people out there who do very little beyond complain about their aches and pains, however rightly that might be. Or, what's Thanksgiving dinner like with your family? Oh my God, we have to invite Grandpa, and he's going to just destroy everything by ranting about his 75-year-old political and religious opinions that no one else can stand to hear. And everybody rushes off as soon as possible from your wisdom to gain further wisdom from the football game. So, if you are wondering about sharing your wisdom, I think you really need to ask, do you have wisdom to share? As a matter of fact, over the years, I have known a few, not many, but several people who were elders. They did have that kind of wisdom, and they were not shunted aside. They were looked up to and treated with respect. People would come to see them and ask their advice, much as we are told in traditional cultures, people did. So if elders are being shunted aside, part of the situation may have to do with the elders themselves. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of wisdom do I have to share? What kind of wisdom am I demonstrating in my life? Because no one wants to hear your platitudes if you're behaving like an old fool. Well, I'm going to start with one very basic point. As you know, when you are finished in the toilet, you flush the toilet before you leave, right? That and in many other respects, you know that you are expected to clean up your messes as you go along. In this case, I am referring to your property, to your money. What is to be done with it? Basically, if you have not done this, you need to write a will. If you've not written a will, you are not being responsible, and you have missed showing a very basic sign of having the wisdom you may wish to display. It is extremely painful for survivors not only to lose a loved one or family member, but to figure out what to do with their papers, their money, their property after that person is not around and has left them no idea of what to do with it. That is not a mark of wisdom. That is not the mark of an elder. This is true for every elder, but it's particularly true if you're aspiring to some sort of wisdom. You simply need to write a will. You need to specify what you want done with what. You may say, I hate my family. I don't want to leave them nothing. Fine. Then specify a worthy cause you want it left to. Even if they get nothing, at least the situation is clear and no one has to be haggling or fighting about it. You may wish to give particular things to particular people. A woman may have a beloved pair of earrings that she wants to give to her favorite niece. Well, you can specify that, or you can give it to your niece while you're still alive. She'll probably use it and get more pleasure out of it than you will. Similarly with other things that really you want to go to one person or another. And let's not mention the really difficult issue of what to do with your pets should they survive you. So this is a very, very basic point of aging spiritually. I know people who have done it. I know people who have not done it. And it makes a big difference to have done it. A related, although more complicated issue is power of attorney. You may at some point wish to designate someone who can handle your affairs for you. This all happened to me about 10 years ago when an elderly aunt of mine who was childless and had only one nephew, me, was quite obviously dying. And a cousin of mine kept saying, you should get power of attorney. You should get power of attorney. Well, as a result of this nagging, I did, although not a minute too soon. And as difficult as it was when my aunt was dying, because she had to go to hospice, and there are a lot of difficult decisions to be made. They were difficult decisions. If I did not have that piece of paper, they would have been almost impossible decisions. I don't know what that means, of course, in your specific situation, but these are really, really important things. And you owe it to your loved ones, or maybe even to your hated ones, to take care of these matters. If your affairs are beyond a certain level of complication, you probably need a lawyer. But if you don't, there are plenty of free will writing services. The Theosophical Society offers one, which you can find out about at the end of this talk. Use ours, use someone else's, but get it done. Then we're led to the question of why people avoid writing wills. Well, the most obvious answer is that thinking about writing a will involves thinking about your own death, which is not a subject people generally enjoy. Most people in our society could be called death postponers. That is to say, yes, we're all aware that we're going to have to go sometime, but not now, at least not unless you have a terminal illness. And whatever you can put off thinking about, you put off. When you're 25, this is, in a way, a reasonable thing to do. When you're 65, It's not, because you have more years behind you than you have ahead of you. And what, even if you didn't, do you want to live to be 130? I personally don't. So you are facing death. And our attitude toward death is, as one best-selling book says in its title, denial, the denial of death. There are many, many different reasons for this, one of which is that the religious foundations of our society have shaken enough so that there's no real commonly accepted belief in an afterlife. If you did a survey, you would probably find that most people do believe in an afterlife of some sort or another. One rather striking statistic, and this has been the case for decades now, is that someplace between 20 and 25% of the American population believe in reincarnation. Although reincarnation is a doctrine that is not taught and explicitly discouraged by the major religions prevalent in the United States. You may believe in reincarnation. You may believe in heaven and hell. If there's no general societal agreement about this, death is considered as finality. Look at all the coverage of all of the disasters, the tragedies, the crimes. These are viewed as particularly grievous by light of the belief that the deaths of all these people, premature or not, are final. Not so long ago, people did not believe that. And the society as a whole did not believe that. Therefore, they were a bit more able to accommodate the presence of death than we are today. Oh, of course, death was also more in your face in those days. Not so long ago, the typical custom was to lay out the body of the deceased in a coffin in the house where people would come to visit. Well, that's all gone now. I don't think you could do that today, possibly without getting arrested for violating some law or another. So death is more remote, less immediate, and more terrifying. And then we have to consider, is this the best way to view it? Traditionally, it was not. In fact, traditional Christianity, take one religion, emphasized meditating upon the last things, death, judgment, and so on. You were encouraged to think about this and dwell on it as a reflection upon what part of you was mortal and what part of you isn't. And I am willing to say that there is a part of us that is immortal. It may not be what we think it is, but it is nonetheless, however, characterized by different religions. And part of the preparation for death in the old ways was at least to contemplate this fact. Sometimes people went through elaborate means to do so. The Emperor Charles V, who ruled Spain, Austria, and lots of other things as well, was the most powerful monarch of the 16th century in Europe. A year or two before he died, he abdicated in favor of his sons so he could do precisely that, The old name for it was the buen morir, the good death. You contemplated the deeds of your life, repented of your sins, and if you were emperor of a good chunk of Europe, you probably had more than a few, and somehow came to terms with them in whatever religious context you happen to be. The Emperor Charles V was a Catholic, so of course it was in those contexts. But all traditions, more or less, have some equivalent of this and encourage you to contemplate the fact of your own death. G.I. Gurdjieff, one of those powerful spiritual teachers of the 20th century, had a rather elaborate theory that, for various reasons that are far too complicated to get into here, the human race had come to view everything in a way that is, as he put it, topsy-turvy. And what was the remedy, he said, for this? The best remedy is to remember every day that you are going to die, and everyone that you will see is going to die. Is that gloomy or morbid? Only from the picture of this life alone. But if you operate from the intuition and perhaps knowledge that there is something immortal in you, it takes on a wholly different perspective. Probably the closest thing I have ever heard to the secret of the universe comes from a play called Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Now, this play at this point seems rather stale and isn't performed much out of high school auditoriums, if there. But at one point, one character says something very important. Now, he says something like this: now, there are all sorts of things that we all know, even though we don't talk about them or think about them that much. And one thing we all know deep down inside, whether we think about it or not, is that there's something that's eternal. And that something has to do with human beings. As you know, you can create all sorts of theologies and doctrines around this, which is obviously not our purpose here. But the recollection of death, the recollection of one's own death, before there is an immediate need to do so. Yes, if you have a terminal disease, you're going to start thinking about this stuff really fast. If you are on death row in some prison, these ideas may have crossed your mind. But I'm talking about this when it is still a remote, though not a certain possibility. Notice and a great deal of the art of ancient times, or fairly recent times, has to do with this. If you're a tourist in Boston, no doubt you will visit the old Puritan cemetery on Tremont Street that goes back to the 17th and 18th centuries. And all of these gravestones, or many of them, are decorated with skulls. The idea was to remind the viewer of his or her own mortality and to take stock of it accordingly. One of the most striking examples I've ever seen of this is in the cathedral in Bristol in England. Now, if you visit those medieval cathedrals, you'll see a lot of sepulchres of nobility and bishops, and the lid often has an effigy of them carved in their armor, their robes, and so on. Well, there's one in Bristol Cathedral that's a little different. It is of Paul Bush, who was the first bishop of Bristol in, the 16th century. And it has an effigy of him carved as a half-rotted corpse. He obviously wanted to bring this point home. The physical body, as you know, is not immortal. It's all very well to prolong its life by whatever medical means, whatever methods of nutrition, exercise, good health that you want. And people are living extraordinarily long these days compared even to our parents. But the end is still going to come. So I would say part of the wisdom of aging has to do with facing these facts. Another important point about aging is that it is a phase of life. And these phases are depicted in many ways. An extremely famous one is The Seven Ages of Man, a speech by Shakespeare in his play As You Like It. It's very famous, but I will read it to you. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy, with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths, and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lines, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon. With spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice, turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends the strange, eventful history. The second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Now, the character who speaks this in this play is a rather melancholic figure. As with everything Shakespeare writes in any of his plays, it is very, very difficult to sort through what Shakespeare himself really thought versus what his characters might be expected to think in their particular situations. But one thing that's interesting about Shakespeare is that he is poet of the world. This was called the sublunary realm, the realm beneath the moon. In the old esoteric science, fate was not believed to apply except to the realm beneath the moon. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So he is dealing with all of this. And that's why God rarely appears in Shakespeare. The people who talk about God in Shakespeare are usually sanctimonious priests and hypocrites. And some have even been led to believe that Shakespeare was an atheist. Well, I don't think he was an atheist. I think he was a student of the occult philosophy of his day. And that's what this speech is about. Because these 7 ages of man correspond to the 7 planets as known in his time. First, the infant mewling and puking. That has to do with the moon, which has to do with growth, nutrition. The whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face has to do with Mercury, which is concerned with learning. The lover, sighing like furnace, is connected with Venus, the planet of love. A soldier jealous in honor, well, that's Mars, who's, as we all know, the god of war. The justice and fair round belly is Jupiter, a benign figure who administers justice. The lean and slippered pantaloon is Saturn, which is the planet of old age, as we can see from its depiction as Father Time. Father Time is often equated with Saturn. So you're growing through these stages, and then it's over. In this way, you're recapitulating emotion from the planets, or the motion through the planetary realms. This is important because spiritual ascent is often portrayed in very much this way. There is an ancient text called the Poimandres, which is part of a larger body of text called the Corpus Hermeticum, the Hermetic body of works, which portrays the liberation of the soul as rising through all of these spheres in exactly the same orders I've just given, and letting go the vices that are associated with each. You've heard of the 7 deadly sins? Well, they're equated with the planets. The moon is envy, Mercury is sloth, Venus is lust, the sun is pride, Mars is anger, Jupiter is gluttony, Saturn is deceit. So all of this involves a certain kind of detachment and liberation from, shall we say, the bonds of earthly existence. Now, it is said that this happens after death, but I'm really talking about it in a context of life, where one goes and sees all of these characteristics in oneself, which may be vices, which may be good qualities, and most likely a combination of the two, as somehow other from oneself. This is called detachment in certain spiritual traditions. Most of the time, we are identified with our personalities, with our egos, with all of these characteristics. We think we are those things, but we aren't. We're less and more. What are we? What part of us is eternal? It is something called the self, capital S. It is the watcher within us. This is what certain meditative practices are intended to illuminate. Because, and it's not a particularly difficult practice, you can, in a meditative state, look at all of your physical responses as if they somehow belong to another. And then it turns out you could look at all of the thoughts, emotions, and everything that you identify with, good and bad, as nothing more than images passing on a screen. So if you can stand back from all things and watch them as from a distance, It follows that you are not these things. So who are you? Well, that away is the point. There was a famous Hindu mystic of the 20th century named Sri Ramana Maharshi, who said that if you simply took the question, who am I, and contemplated it and followed it further and further back, you would attain enlightenment. In any event, some of the process of aging spiritually must have to do with sorting out for ourselves, always to some degree, of course, of what is immortal and what isn't. You certainly know your body will die. Well, your personality, as you know it, is going to die too. I mean, just think about it. Are you going to be a Republican or a Democrat after you're dead? Why would you possibly care? Even religious and national racial allegiances seem totally irrelevant. They'll be of no concern to you. So there is this process of detachment. So am I arguing that something survives death? Yes, I am. Pretty much the verdict of humanity universally has come down to this. We all know that there's something that's eternal, and there's something that has to do with human beings. We also know that the afterlife fate of this eternal self has been characterized in many, many, many ways. Some of them are really pretty horrible. Some of them are good. Some religions say, well, once you die, you go to the left or you go to the right, and that's it forever. No, maybe. Other religions say, well, yeah, you go to the right and you go to the left, but all of those, even those are all temporary states, and you will, in a sense, grow out of hell and go into another realm, or your good karma will be exhausted in heaven and you're going to have to go back down to lower levels in an ongoing cycle. That is, by the teaching of these religions, rather hard to break out of. I myself am willing only to say that I believe the afterlife is not going to be exactly how we pictured it. We're picturing the afterlife in terms of earthly life. Hell is just an extremely awful version of earthly life. Tortures that are physical, mental, that we can more or less imagine from our own human experience. Heaven is merely earthly life portrayed in the sunniest possible way. I think we, in a sense, have to think about eternity and the afterlife in terms of this, because it's very difficult for us to think of it in any other terms, because we are bound to characterize everything in terms of earthly experience, because that's where we are. But I think it would be good to consider that the truth may look very different on the other side. Now, there's been a great deal of attention given over the past few decades to the near-death experience, the NDE. And with near-death experiences, we are dealing with people who are clinically dead, right? These are people who are on some operating table, and not only has their heart stopped, but their brainwave activity has stopped. And present-day medicine distinguishes life from death by brainwave activity rather than heartbeat. So even when you're flatlining, some people have come back. And they've come back with remarkably similar experiences, going through a tunnel of light, creating loved ones, so on, so on. About 5%, by the way, report extremely negative experiences, like having devils grab at them or whatnot. Now, whatever you want to make of this, and I think it is strongly suggestive of an afterlife, I think we have to stop short of saying it is proof of an afterlife. Why? Well, just look at the name of these experiences. They're near-death experiences. They're pretty close, but they're not death experiences, because if they were, those people wouldn't have come back. You'll notice if you look at a lot of near-death experiences that often a person is given a choice. Well, it's pretty nice up here. There's a lot of suffering. My body looks like a dead worm on the operating table. I don't really go back. And some kind of choice is given. Well, you have responsibilities, you have loved ones, and the people choose inevitably to come back. Does everybody inevitably choose to come back? No, but we're only going to hear from the people who have. The ones who didn't are going to be dead. They really just went on, for reasons good or bad. So there is a way in which there is an afterlife, and I think it's useful to contemplate. I think the world's religious traditions are correct in saying that the shape of this afterlife will have something to do with your behavior in this life. Although to what extent that may be is clear. It's very hard for me to accept the conventional doctrine of eternal damnation for what is always, that is infinite damnation, for what is always going to be a finite number of offenses. So infinite punishment for finite offenses. Because no matter whether you're an ordinary sinner or one of the great monsters of history, your misdeeds are finite. Eternal justice would seem to dictate that infinite punishment for finite offenses just doesn't hang. Why is this doctrine taught? Well, it's a very useful method of social control. And the role of fear in governing the human character and shaping the human character and shaping human society is a great and a profound one. But I personally am willing to think that, there may be very many unpleasant possibilities in the afterlife, and many pleasant ones. Maybe neither of them is eternal, and only the self, the witness, which can experience all of these things, good, bad, indifferent, and any number of things that we can't even imagine, is eternal. I'm going to leave that here. And I'm going to turn to one last issue, which is the meaning of life. The question gets asked every day. It usually seems as meaningless as most of the answers that are given. And if you think about it, what does meaning mean? Because meaning usually refers to something else, right? The meaning of watch is this, right? So what is the meaning of life? Well, of course, there are all sorts of answers, but I'll give you my own. And maybe it's not an answer, maybe it's a non-answer. But I'm going to read from my latest book, 7 Games of Life. This is the prologue. And I will let you make of it what you will. It's a parable of sorts. From time to time, you hear rumors about a game. It is said to be the ultimate game, Compared to it, chess, Go, and all others are no better than tic-tac-toe. At first, you pay no attention. This rumor just passes through your mind like any other bit of news. But the topic comes up more than once, and you learn that there really is such a game. You meet some veterans who confirm that it surpasses all others. Some even say you haven't even lived until you've played it. Other details are obscure. You ask its name and are told it doesn't really have a name, or you'll find out after you've played. Veterans are maddeningly vague about everything else as well. Soon this game becomes more than a matter of curiosity to you. You are put in contact with the organizers of the game, but their descriptions are no more specific. You are merely told that you will play for an indefinite amount of time. Then you will be removed for reasons that may or may not make sense in terms of the game. Some players stay in for decades. Others are removed almost immediately for reasons that are not given. You will not be told how long you will be playing. Nor are you told the rules or the object of the game, or even if it has any. You are only told that there will be other players. The game has been going on for a long time and will continue after you have left. The game will take up all of your waking life. You will not be permitted to take breaks. When it is over for you, you will leave, and that is that. Nevertheless, you remain free at all times. You only have to say you want to leave, and you will be immediately removed. The organizers refuse to tell you whether the game has any rewards if played right. It may or may not. After you have finished, you'll be able to evaluate the experience for yourself. These explanations are so frustrating that you are tempted to name the game may or may not. Can I get hurt, you ask? Yes, you can get hurt very badly, the organizers reply. You can endure an extraordinary amount of pain and suffering. We do, however, monitor the game very precisely, and when you reach a certain threshold of suffering, you will be immediately removed. We can assure you that you will suffer no permanent damage. On the other hand, it is not all about hardship and suffering. You will have the opportunity for genuine joys and rewards, all in the context of the game, of course. The organizers tell you no more. They do not pressure you or imply any need for hurry. You have no idea what to do with this information. The prudent response is to walk away, at least for enough time to think. Yet spontaneously, almost before you realize it, you decide to play. Immediately, you are put into the game. About its setting, all you can say is that it is extremely confusing. It bears no resemblance to real life, so little that you are barely able to walk or move at first. The other players speak a language that you have never heard before and do not understand. The situation would be hopeless unless certain people took you in, fed you, and told you how to move around. This process seems to take eternities. But little by little, you realize that you have a definite place in this game, determined first by the people who took you in. If they have some status or power, it extends to you. If they are in a low situation, that extends to you as well. As you navigate your way, you also discover that you have certain strengths and weaknesses that either enable you to function in this realm or impede you from doing so. They have no relation to your characteristics in the real world. Some participants, you learn, are playing games within the game. One is to amass quantities of a certain object. As far as you can see, the choice of object is completely arbitrary, but it was made long before you started to play. Your share of these objects makes a great deal of difference to your game life. You soon find that you can hardly get anything to eat or even find a place to sleep without them. At first, you find the process of obtaining these objects as mystifying as everything else in this world. But eventually, by observation and trial and error, you learn ways of acquiring them. You may find this particular subgame easy or difficult. Obscurely, you sense that your ability in it has something to do with your strengths and weaknesses as a game character. Even so, some players with great strengths and few weaknesses have very few of these objects. Others with few positive qualities amass a large number. In any case, players who are taken out of the game leave all of these things behind them, which are divided among the remaining players. Others play with sex and love. Some copulate indiscriminately, although you soon learn that this is frowned upon and usually forbidden, but by whom? Most, however, attempt to find a partner they can stay with over the course of the game. This becomes a bitter preoccupation. Some, even most, succeed, but others fail and suffer great disappointment. Bonds, love, attachment develop. When a player's partner is pulled from the game, the player grieves, having no idea of whether they will ever meet again. As you adapt, you are led to a certain observation. The rules that appear to enable you to succeed here do not always apply. The minute you think you understand how to achieve something, some incident or person comes along to prove otherwise. Worst of all are disruptions that have no apparent connection to anyone's actions. People amass quantities of valuable items only to wake up the next day to find that they have vanished. Others wake up to find that they are, in the game's context, rich. You're particularly frightened by one set of occurrences. Sometimes, for no known reason, a large group of people are removed from the game. Sometimes they all live in a certain vicinity. Other times, the removal has to do with some apparently irrelevant quality that they have in common. For example, all red-haired people in a given area may be taken out at once. Some players are frustrated by these conditions. They shake their fists and curse the organizers, whom they cannot see. Others beg them for help. These actions have no apparent effect. The frustration builds to the point where people take it out on one another. Fights break out, sometimes causing serious harm. But as the organizers told you, individuals who are hurt beyond a certain point are removed from the game. Even more frightening are the large-scale fights. Groups of people, almost all of them men, decide that another group are enemies. Sometimes a reason is given. For example, the other group has more items of value. But more often, the causes for these outbursts are inexplicable. Yet many men are injured, and many of these are removed from the game. Other individuals try to make sense of this confusing situation. They devote a great deal of attention to figuring out the game's rules. Some claim to have succeeded. If you follow them, you too will succeed. These individuals can be very persuasive and attract large numbers of followers. You, however, notice that the rules that these groups observe have little or no connection to the actual progress of events. But it is dangerous to point this out to those who have faith in these rules. Often there is hostility between different groups of followers, which breaks out into open conflicts. At times, you are so bewildered or frightened that you want to quit. But here the same uncertainties apply. What if the object of the game is to stay until you are removed, and asking to be removed means that you have lost? Indeed, many of the other players insist that this is the case, although, of course, they have no more idea of the truth than you do. All learning takes place within the game and appears to have no applications outside it. The confusion deepens because being totally immersed in this game, you forget that there is anything else. Occasionally, a shadow of a memory of your real-world life passes across your mind, but it is so faint that you ignore it or decide it is just your imagination. Your only reminder of the real world is the fact that players are removed from the game all the time. You have been told in advance that you will be removed yourself. But you have become so immersed in this game that this possibility frightens you. You have forgotten who or what you are, and even whether you exist outside of it. Most of the other players avoid any recollection of the life beyond, and some have even ceased to believe in it. You drift toward bizarre streams of thought. At one point, you are having lunch and are pouring blue cheese dressing onto your salad. It occurs to you, what if your success in the game is entirely determined by how much blue cheese dressing you consume? Or what if the object is to snap your fingers, and the number of times you snap your fingers is the measure of your success? Or what if there are no rules? What if the game is merely a playground to frolic on, indulging in whatever amusements the players make up? These questions have occurred to the other players as well, and you discuss them endlessly, always ending in the same stalemate. Whatever conclusions you may draw, no one knows the answers any more than anyone else. Soon you recognize that such trains of thought are unhealthy. You decide that until you have figured out the object of the game, the best approach is to live as good a life as you can while you are in it. Those who at first appear to have the best lives are those who have amassed the largest number of possessions. But you soon realize that this has almost no actual connection with happiness. Indeed, the wealthiest ones are the most anxious. Somebody may take their possessions away, or they may wake up to find that everything is gone. Nor do they like the idea that when the game is over for them, all of these things will be passed on to someone else. On further consideration, you see that the happiest people are those who have amassed enough of the goods of this life to survive, but not enough to arouse others' greed or envy. They live quietly and peacefully, enjoying good relations around them and having few enemies. These people are no more immune to sudden convulsions than anyone else, but they accept misfortunes with good humor, understanding that these are merely part of the game. Some of these people seem to have gone further. Unlike the fabricators of rules, they utter things that suggest that they do have some insight into the game. They avoid amassing followers, living more quietly and obscurely than anyone else. People occasionally ask them about what it all means, but their answers are unclear and even paradoxical or self-contradictory. Occasionally, they will speak in a strange language that you dimly remember as the language of the real world. But although it made sense there, here it is incomprehensible. Hence, most players assume that these people are insane. Finally, you make a shocking discovery. The meaning or object of the game cannot be known within the game itself. Thank you.